You're listening to the Everyone's Wrong podcast, where we leave trigger warnings, safe spaces, and political correctness behind to explore the extremes of political discourse.
Hey, you fucks. This is Everyone's Wrong. I'm Dave, a.k.a. the Great White North.
I'm Dustin Dark.
And I'm Ed Smith.
Also, Kyle Guerin. I'm back again.
You're back again. Ready for a big fucking showdown with Ed Smith. So tonight's show is a little bit different. We won't be talking about the news or the shitty things that are happening around because, oh man, there's a lot of shitty things to talk about. But tonight we're going to have a debate between Ed Smith and the communist. Does that mean to call him communist? Because I'm totally just fucking with you. No, they're going to have a civil conversation and it should be great. I'm not going to moderate the debate. I'm going to leave the duties to Dustin to moderate. So I'm checking out. I'm going to mute myself and I'm done. Later.
Well, there you go. All right. So tonight's topic is whether or not capitalism should be dismantled. Kyle is going to start out with a 20-minute, or he has a 20 minutes made available to him to lay his foundation, and then Ed will come with 20 minutes, and then we'll have some 5 minutes segments after that, and then a short conversation at the end. Okay, so Kyle, you have the first segment tonight, so I guess kick it off whenever you're ready.
So the question at hand is whether or not capitalism should be dismantled. So my goal tonight is to develop an understanding of some of the fundamental contradictions of capitalism and how dismantling of these particular components that I'm going to examine would result in a healthier and stronger society for all people. The greatest crime of capitalism, in my opinion, is the destruction of the ability of the individual to recognize the capacity of working together as a society. It demands that we respect the so-called tyranny of the individual while disrespecting the needs of the many. The question at hand with regards to whether or not capitalism should be dismantled is essentially that we need to be examining certain components, So when we talk about dismantling, what it means to dismantle, we're not talking about destroying, we're talking about breaking it down into components. What we do with those components determines the shape and functioning of any future societies. We can build a society in any shape we so desire from functional based components once we dismantle them and understand them for what they are. So the first component and contradiction I want to examine is called the limits to growth, or essentially the carrying capacity of society / the planet. The limits to growth is a point at which the resources available to the planet are not equivalent to the resources needed to sustain the population. So any system that focuses on exponential growth has the ability to decay those limits of the carrying capacity and also holds an inability to change in response to immediate crises is vulnerable to the limits of growth. A common example we use about the limits to growth or in population biology is deer and wolves. Lots of deer means lots of wolves. The wolves eat the deer, and then some of the wolves starve. Less wolves means more deer, and the cycle continues, so forth and so on. But humans, unlike wolves, can work the land until it is no longer capable of supporting life, damaging the carrying capacity of the land, and thus this idea of the limits to growth, my first component. But that's a really large scale particular issue. What I also want to talk about is a more individualized one. My next component is the belief or self-actualization and meritocracy. So self-actualization is the point at which one is no longer working to provide their basic needs, but is instead working to fulfill a deeper emotional and spiritual need. In order to achieve this state, in order to self-actualize, one needs to have their basic needs met, from food and water to housing and safety and education and labor, socialization, etc., etc. No capitalist society guarantees basic human needs. Yet all of these basic human needs are necessary to achieve the state known as self-actualization. This is a fundamental contradiction of the narrative of capitalism. The idea, also building on that, of meritocracy is touted as a prominent feature of capitalist societies. Yet, more often than not, one's parents determine their status in society rather than their own merit. If we were to have a meritocracy of wealth, it would require a 100% estate tax. A meritocracy of education would require communal child raising. Meritocracy of resources would require massive centralized distribution and organization. Yet, if all of these things were to exist within the capitalist system, there would not be a reason for one to dedicate their life to the accumulation of wealth. Another fundamental contradiction. Again, I repeat, the greatest crime of capitalist societies is the destruction of the belief that humans can work together to achieve great things. Instead, we are relegated to being victims of the tyranny of the individual, where luck in birth, more often than merit, makes up your status. So, given that, I believe a solution would be institution of basic material rights for all people. These rights can be, but are not limited to, food, housing, healthcare, and education, possibly others, but those four for certain: food, housing, healthcare, education. Which brings me to my last component I want to examine, which is efficiency. So efficiency is touted as a feature of capitalism, a measure of productivity per unit of time worked. However, utilization in comparison to efficiency is a measure of how much of that productivity goes to meeting actual human needs. This is another contradiction. So when we speak about these basic rights I want to secure with food, the USDA rates American food waste at 31 to 40% of the supply, a serious failure of the idea of efficiency. This overproduction of food leading to waste also contributes to the component known as the limits of growth. Land is farmed with petrochemical fertilizers which drain into the ocean, creating dead zones, reducing the carrying capacity of the planet for all people. With housing, we have the same issues, efficiency versus utilization. There are 17 million vacant homes and 3 million homeless in America alone. The production of houses has served to maximize the value of home at the cost of freedom and self-actualization. More and more houses are managed by homeowner associations who focus on maximizing the value over utilization of the resource for the benefit of the owners. I don't know if this applies in other states, but this is particularly a sort of criticism that's in my society. With healthcare, most countries provide healthcare as a basic right. The largest, most capitalist one does not. The government focus on providing profits to a small industry over the basic well-being and sustainability of the economy is an example of the limits to growth, that inability to make changes in response to oncoming pressing issues. With education, all choices are limited by knowledge. Thus, developing a comprehensive education system is necessary for maximizing individual human opportunity as well as society's opportunities. The individual value produced by each college graduate as well as doctoral graduates would serve as a tax base for funding any sort of full education system. So those four basic rights are the foundation of what I believe would sort of deal with attacking these sort of critical components that are at risk of so-called collapsing society, damaging society. Attacking these components, attacking these problems. So if we were to say attacking the problem of the limits of growth creates permanent culture in which we can now focus on creating lasting, stable communities. So component one, limits to growth, attacking or defeating that would result in lasting, stable communities. as we are no longer focused on exponential growth in this endless thing. A society focused on meritocracy and self-actualization would lead to nurture the abilities of all so that they bloom, rather than focus on the legacies of the past and essentially working on developing the next generation of legacies rather than letting those legacies of the past hold on to what they've done well after they've gone. You know, when we're talking about meritocracy and children of rich and the wealthy, small loans of $1 million kind of thing. Dealing with the component of utilization efficiency would provide better goods to more people. Limiting the ability of individuals to own excess resources necessary to the public good improves the ability of everyone to have access to those necessary resources. Without proper management of these three components, we are dealing with a scenario in which 5 to 85% of the population is at risk of death from the limits to growth and collapse. With proper management, we are looking at a long cultural shift towards more connected and a better operated society. So, given all that, it requires a massive amount of labor. I've laid out more or less this sort of incredibly large scale sort of solution to these problems very rapidly, but it begins at the individual level. So I ask now that the individual who's listening takes these ideas and values themselves. And if you value yourself, then I can ask you to learn what you want from society. And if you learn what you want from society, then you can lay claim to a demand or to make those demands of society. And if you can demand from society, then you can find others to work together with to create those demands. And if you find others to make those demands with you, then you can work to build the changes that you know need to happen. And if you're already building those changes, you will find that the process of change has already begun and you are a part of it. But it begins with the innate value of existence. I believe in the value and capacity of each human and humanity, and I want others to recognize that as well, not only in others, but within themselves. There you go.
Yeah, sorry. Can I backhand whoever's in the room with you? I don't know who these people are. So whoever's in the room with you, I would like to backhand to the next week. They're just loud in the background. That's all. I'm just bitching, man. I'm a.
Oh,
yeah. No, it's fine. It's fine. Anyway, okay, Kyle. So you filled up your time there. Ed, you have 20 minutes yourself, sir.
Okay. Good evening. I would like to take the time to thank my interlocutor, Kyle, for accepting this challenge and for his presentation. It's great to see two people with opposing positions actually engage in civil discourse. Too often we see channels of discourse shut down. So I'm glad, especially glad, to the Everyone's Wrong podcast for allowing us to have this platform tonight. Now, I won't be directly addressing any of Kyle's beginning remarks. I'll wait till the rebuttals to do that. So I'm just going to go ahead with what I have to say. I'm a proud capitalist, and why shouldn't I be? For generations, capitalism has been the source for lifting millions of people out of poverty, raising the standards of living, and ushered in an era of freedom that is unsurpassed in human history. Capitalism is flexible. In fact, the capitalist system has evolved and changed over the years, being refined and improved along the way. Without capitalism, modern Western society would not be as successful as it is today. It was capitalism that created the wealth that permitted Canada, the country I live in, to be able to create the universal healthcare system that we all enjoy. It is capitalism that allows us to pay for the free education our children receive. And it was capitalism that was the driving force behind centuries of innovation and invention. These are the very ideas that revolutionize the way we communicate, we work, and live. But capitalism isn't perfect. It has continued to have issues. But capitalism isn't a static concept. It is dynamic and an ongoing process that requires continual vigilance and refinement. We can see its evolution from its very humble beginnings to mercantilism, and to laissez-faire economics, to the industrialized capitalism we know today. It is a continual process of change, making improvements along the way. One of the best things about the capitalist system is its flexibility, its willingness to embrace change. We must remember that during the period since 1750, our living standards have doubled every 50 years, seeing each generation better off than its predecessor. On a global scale, we see capitalism has allowed poor countries to become self-sufficient and prosperous. In fact, since the 1970s, people living on just $1 a day has been reduced by over 80%. We are experiencing the greatest improvement in living standards the world has ever seen in its entire history. Take, for instance, China. During the forced collectivization of Mao's communist regime, 64% of the population was thrust into abject poverty, not to mention the millions of those that were killed and died just out of neglect. But when Chairman Mao died, leaving his country in ruins, his successor, Deng Xiaoping, saw that other Asian countries like Taiwan, Japan, Hong Kong, and South Korea were prospering under the capitalist system. He saw his people stagnant, impoverished, starving, in a state of unrest. He decided to change his model. He slowly brought in a model of capitalism that's similar to mercantilism and watched his country transform. It quickly began to prosper. China saw its poverty rate drop from 64% to just around 8%. When asked why he adopted this quasi-capitalist system, he said it doesn't matter if the cat was black or white so long as it catched mice. Global indexes repeatedly demonstrate that the most prosperous nations of the world are those that are economically free. The benefits of capitalism are not just economic. As capitalism has spread around the globe, it has taken democracy with it. They are the sides of the same coin. Both capitalism and democracy rely on people to have the freedom to choose. From choosing what to purchase, to choosing your career, to choosing your government, freedom allows the individual to prosper. Capitalism is colorblind. It doesn't care what color you are, where you're from, who your parents are. It recognizes ability. It rewards people who do well. The same cannot be said of any state-planned economy. This form of economy lies on everyone being told what to do and when to do it, on everybody being assigned a role and being expected to perform in that capacity. Centrally run governments fail because they remove the choice of the people. Those countries with state-planned economies had runaway inflation, stagnant economies, and extreme poverty. Those people that suffered the most under the system were not wealthy. They weren't bankers or super rich. The people who suffered most under these were ordinary men and women, people who worked hard, people who wanted just to support and provide for their families. In contrast, those based on capitalism enjoy healthier, freer, and more prosperous lives. Again, I must point out that I'm not blind to the problems of the capitalist system. We do have disparity of income. But as anyone can see, this disparity is relative. Even the most poor among capitalist countries are wealthier than those of many nations. But does this mean we give up and stop trying to change the financial outcomes of our society? Absolutely not. Nor does this mean that we throw in the towel on capitalism. It means that there are opportunities to change and improve our system. It makes us examine the ways we can change our society and improve. Yes, there are people who exploit workers in hopes of maximizing profits. There are those who cheat the system. There are those who cut corners in the areas of healthcare and safety. There are those who do irreversible damage to the environment. And of course, there are those who refuse to play by the rules, causing suffering to many. But these are the outliers. They are not representative of the entire system. Our job is to reward those that do not act this way with our wallets. The best part of the capitalist system is that the markets, that is the people, decide where to spend their money and what companies survive and those who do not. So far, I've only spoken in generalities and wish to turn to a more in-depth examination of what capitalism and socialism, communism really are. Capitalism offers its participants a chance to act in a society's best interest by rewarding hard work, intelligence, persistence, and innovation. Capitalism is the sole system that increases both economic growth and freedom. The capitalist system requires the rule of law. The rule of law protects individuals, property rights, enforces contracts, and provides stability to society. This leads to a reduction in uncertainty and responds to both political and social pressures. One important feature of the capitalist system is that it disperses power. Capitalism survives and spreads because it permits choice for change. It allows change to be rejected after one sees the outcome. Competition brings choice and improves relevance not only to commerce but to life. Example, in the United States, you find that the universities there compete for the best and brightest scholars of the mind. That's a good thing because right now, human intelligence can be found anywhere in the world, but they seek the United States, particularly for its universities. This global competition drives this impulse to change for ideas and innovation. Capitalism recognizes that when individual wants differ, the market should be free to respond. Greed and envy were the driving forces initially under capitalism, but it also has produced growth and raised living standards benefiting many. Capitalism, and I want to stress this, capitalism does not offer a static vision of perfection and harmony. Democratic capitalism combines freedom, opportunity, growth, progress, and competition with restrictions on less desirable behavior. It creates societies that treat both men and women as they are, but not how some utopian vision wants them to be. Unrestricted capitalism lets markets determine what income is distributed, but no modern democratic capitalist system accepts this outcome. Democracy permits voters to change tax regimes and reduce and be able to redistribute income. The reason why capitalism spreads and survives is it because it permits the individual the chance for change. It allows change to be rejected. And unfortunately, socialism does not. Socialism is a top-down or bottom-up repressive organization. And just explain to you what I mean, there are five main concepts in socialism. The first was Marx's concept, and we'll just look at the political structure because Marx gave none. He had no clear design for what the political regime of socialism would be. Marx certainly did not want democracy. He called it bourgeois. He advocated dictatorship of the proletariat as the foundation to the communist system. Marx also had some naive ideas about what would happen during the stages that would lead to communism. Since every need would be met, an impossible task, even on the most grandiose scale, he said the necessity for every kind of force of repression would cease automatically. That just didn't play out in history when it was put into practice. The state would spontaneously shrink and everything and eventually wither and die, and only rational self-governance and the community would remain. This is self-evidently not what happens when a socialist government takes over, whether it is elected in or whether it is forcibly taken over. Let's talk about ownership. Marx blamed the capitalists because they owned assets. He said it exploited the proletariat because it consists not of the mercilessly cruel people, no, but because they were the legal owners of the capital. Both Marx and Engels were opting for public ownership. The proletariat will use political supremacy, he says, to wrest by degrees all capital from the bourgeois, to centralize all instruments of production in the hands of the state, if the proletariat organized as the ruling class. Marx and Engels, Communist Manifesto, 1848. Marx expressed high appreciation of the progressive role played by early capitalism in its cleansing society from the remnants of feudalism. But that period was soon to be over, and capitalism would become no more and a hindrance to progress. But as we saw in the 20th century, some of the worst slaughters in human history occurred under the communist socialist regime. Marx regarded the market as a spectacular manifestation of anarchy. He did not study the problem of efficiency carefully, but he arrived at his conclusion that the market led to waste. The coordination mechanism under socialism has to be the exact opposite of what works under capitalism. Again, the coordinated mechanism, or the mechanism that would coordinate the society, will have to be concise and reasonable and allow the allocation of production forces or labor or of time or of time spent on labor. Marx did not provide or offer a blueprint for central planning, but his idea of rational allocation is only compatible with central planning and not compatible with the market economy. Marx was among the first social scientists who recognized the importance of ideology, but Marx did not suggest what this ideology should be. Then we get into further social science or socialist theory. We call what is known as the Walrasian concept. Good thing this was only academic. It's between socialists, and the theory was pioneered by a man named Oscar Lange, and his seminal paper on the theory of socialism. Lange's model of socialism fit tightly into a theoretical framework of Walrasian economics, thus where it gets its name. It's a special application of the general equilibrium theory pioneered by Leon Walras. Socialism means public ownership and nothing else. Lange's paper has no word of how power would be distributed or the structure of the political regime or its ideology, just like Marx. And then Lange's model suffered from two great attacks. Both, actually, were by Friedrich von Hayek in 1935. Hayek's refutation came in his brilliant essay based on the argument that such vast quantity of information and knowledge cannot be collected and stored and utilized by a central state. It is indispensable to have decentralized incentives for gathering and applying knowledge. That is precisely why capitalism works, because of this decentralization of power, and allows people to be able to move freely through the system. But when we get to Lenin despised and rejected the rhetoric of democracy. He thought it was bourgeois himself, and he ushers in one of the worst totalitarian regimes of the 20th century, where you have 60 million people slaughtered, and not during the revolution, which occurred, but his successor Stalin allowed his people to starve because of socialism not allowing production. It doesn't allow it efficiently. But I'm going on too long. Basically, capitalism equates freedom, democracy, and hard work. Socialism, totalitarian dictatorship, unfreedom, and poverty. And that's it.
Okay, I cannot believe that Ed finished with 3 minutes to spare. I was certain I was going to have to cut you off.
Yeah, no, I saw the X coming down, so I sped up, and I have more. Sorry, I have more.
Yeah, you have more? Okay, all right. So, Kyle, are you ready for your 5-minute rebuttal?
So, I've never done a rebuttal before, but I just wanted to bring up some ideas or thoughts that I think might contradict some of these ideas. In my speech, I sort of talked about a couple of ideas, the limits to growth, self-actualization, and meritocracy, as well as these ideas of efficiency versus utilization. So when we talk about the freedom of capitalism and the successes in some of these countries, we talk about North Korea versus South Korea. North Korea doing Jewish, South Korea being a capitalist economy. I used air quotes there, but you can't see it. Unfortunately, what many people don't historically recognize about South Korea is that it had a centrally planned capitalist economy for up to the 1980s, I believe, as well as being run by a dictatorship. So the idea that authoritarianism is necessarily inherent to socialism is not necessarily true. Furthermore, I wanted to kind of touch on this idea of the successes of capitalism across the world, because it's easy to look at the first world, America / Europe, and say, oh, there's the successes of capitalism. When we turn to other nations and other continents around the planet, such observations are not so readily apparent, I believe. Where are the successes of capitalism in Africa, in Asia, in South America? We see certainly the idea of success in some places, such as Brazil. We've heard perhaps ideas of the success of Chile, but evidence shows that Chile, who was a propped up dictator by the American state, actually suffered two of the most severe financial crises underneath his dictatorship. Furthermore, let's build on this idea of innovation and how free markets allow competition between people. So I work in a research lab. I deal with a lot of PhDs, MD PhDs, very high level educated people. And one of the most recent stories I talked about was a particular program for training MD PhDs between Caltech and UCLA. So this is one of the most stringent and difficult programs to get into in the United States as a training program. And what this particular person was talking to me about was that they'd been in the program 15 years and hadn't completed, and many of the people had burnt out. And this meeting that she had gone to served to primarily discuss how this program benefited the PIs, the professor or the principal investigators, who took on these MSTP students while the students themselves had burnt out. I do not think the best system in the world uses and exploits our best and brightest to the point at which they give up on their career of choice, which brings back to my point of self-actualization. Lastly, there's this idea of freedom in the state. So I wanted to talk, at least in America, we have an issue with this particular idea in that America's government, there's a study done by Stanford which showed that 100% of public policy decisions made by the government were in favor of wealthy Americans or special interests, aka business and lobbyists. So what this study did was they looked at public policy decisions made over the last 50 years. They looked at pulling on those decisions from the American public as a whole, as well as wealthy Americans and then special interests. And what they found was 100% of decisions were in favor of wealthy Americans or special interests. So the argument, or at least the idea that there's this freedom, it's strictly in the sense of the tyranny of the individual, as I said in my speech. It's not actual freedom as a society to make changes for where society wants to go, at least in America. So, furthermore, finishing up sort of my rebuttal, we had discussions of these ideas of early versus late capitalism. We had Marx, Lang, Hayek, and these sort of kind of ideas of that if we were to centralize all the needs of humanity, it would be impossible to manage. Yet Hayek, Marx, and all of these fellows could not imagine the capacity of quantum computing or, say, even regular computing when it comes to the ideas of dealing with this level of need.
Okay, I'm going to cut you off there. You're a little over 5 minutes. Ed, you want to come in here?
Sure. Well, I'm going to go with the efficiency first, because utilization, the definition is the extent to which installed capacity performs actual work. So if you have a worker, he's there for 8 hours, is extent in which he works at capacity. That's utilization. Efficiency is how much real work gets done. every capitalist I've ever known and ever read has always said efficiency and not utilization. So we want workers, they could be working 4 hours and have 4 hours of freedom doing jack as long as the efficiency is there, the amount of work being done is good. That's what they're looking for. That's the efficiency. I have to go with that one. When we're talking about, you say that where are the success stories in Asia? Wow. Let's just open up the box. We go to Taiwan, Singapore, Hong Kong, China, Japan. These are all success stories coming out of Asia based on the capitalist system. Remember, and he also said Africa. Okay, Morocco. You're talking about South Africa. The list where you do not see capitalism in Africa, you see corruption, you see a massive inequality where people are actually desperately poor, where they're not even getting the basic necessities of life. Where capitalism exists, you see people that we have welfare institutions. We have places where people can get food, where they can get shelter. And especially in Canada, I'm Canadian, so I will take some exception to some of the things that you're saying, because the capitalist system where I live in is a social democracy. So we take in parts of socialism and we mix it in with capitalism. But the capitalism is what drives the ability of the social programs that we enjoy. If we didn't have a capitalist economy, there would be nobody to pay for the benefits that we receive. So, let me see. If you want to talk about a utopian, one of the things I really want to get past is this utopian idea of what one person thinks people should be and what actually people are. People are individuals. There's variation throughout our species. We have people with different cultures, different languages, different skin colors, what have you. The gamut's there. Yet capitalism, when it comes in, it doesn't say you have to re-educate. It doesn't say we have to teach you have to follow this set of ideology. Capitalism treats them as they are, and it's really visible if you really look at it. Japanese capitalism is nowhere near the same as the American capitalism, or Chinese capitalism, or British capitalism, or Canadian capitalism. It allows you to take the capitalist principles and fit them into the cultural context in which you live. And that is one of the benefits of the capitalist system. You don't have to change. Under every utopian idea that I've seen been expressed, from cooperatives to libertarianism to socialist systems, they all want to change people to their ideology, to their set limit. And anything outside of that is a divergent from that and has to be suppressed. So I don't understand where you're coming from when you want to say that that we people have to self-actualize. Because on one hand you say that it's the tyranny of the individual, yet you say that people need to self-actualize. So which is it? Is the individual that self-actualizes the tyranny, or the person that's an individual that doesn't self-actualize the tyranny? And I'll concede for the crossover.
Okay, Kyle?
Hello. So I don't know how this stage goes. Are we just kind of back and forth in now?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. All right, cool. So I guess I'll start with your particular claim about the idea of self-actualization versus the tyranny of the individual, right? So I live in California, where we have lots of traffic, shitty drivers, all that good stuff, right? So in California, at least right now, and I think this is something a lot of people can relate to, the difference between self-actualization and the tyranny of the individual. Self-actualization is like, okay, you really like fast cars, you like going fast. You get a little bit of time on the weekend to go down to the racetrack and drive your nice car that you built and fixed up. That's the idea of self-actualization. Tyranny of the individual is when you're stuck in traffic and you got cars zooming past you on the shoulder to cut you off 10 feet ahead of you, slowing down traffic for everybody. That's the difference between the two, if you're curious. Or at least that's what I think of it as.
And how is that the fault of capitalism?
More or less, it's the sort of cultural drive to always get ahead, saving seconds, efficiency, making money, you know? I don't necessarily think it's the fault, but it's...
Well, one of the things I wanted to ask you is what is the mechanism by which we implement the system that you are suggesting that we do?
So my system, right, like I said, is this kind of idea of material rights, basic rights to food, education, healthcare, housing, and maybe more. So to implement this system, right, there's a couple of ways to go about it. We have the most revolutionary way in which society realizes through, I don't know, some sort of book, a la Mao's Little Red Book, or program or TV show, the sudden need for these things, and they gather spontaneously and begin the process of creating it, probably in a very, very destructive way.
I'm going to just stop you one second.
Yeah.
What about those that do not want to subscribe to that ideology?
So, if, let's say there's a particular population that's demanding basic human needs, right? They're like, we want food, we want housing, we want healthcare, we want education. Generally speaking, the way to prevent revolutionary actions that are violent in nature is to provide those people the opportunity to participate in the economy.
But what they do. In the capitalist system, everybody has an equal opportunity to engage in the system.
To engage, yes, but to self-actualize, no.
But what does that mean?
That means
it's going to be different for every individual. So my self-actualization could be that I want to be a multi-billionaire. That's what's going to self-actualize for me. For you, it could be that you want to drive a fast car, or
What aspect of the labor of becoming a billionaire provides spiritual satisfaction?
But that's your opinion. For me, it could. I'm not saying it does. I'm just saying that it could. For me, swimming in $1 billion on my bed might be my whole entire life's work, built to do that. Why can you tell me that that's
but what
not
aspect of that is self-actualizing? What aspect of that is spiritual in nature? That's the whole thing.
But then you have to accept that there are some people that don't believe in a spirit and that don't believe in this in that ideology. What I'm trying to get at, I guess my thrust of my point is the idea is that this is what you or a group of individuals believe is best for society. However, it may not be the best.
I do see your point, like, let's say theoretically, like, maybe I'm completely wrong. Maybe the limits to growth don't happen. Maybe evidence comes out and they do the research in EvoPsych and it turns out that people like hierarchies and they like being dominated. And 80% of human beings prefer working for someone else. Only 20% want to be it. And if we organize society by those routes, we'd be perfectly justified, right? At the same time, that still does not contradict my initial point of the limits to growth, which is that the capitalist system, one that's focused on exponential growth, has the capacity to decay the carrying capacity of particular land, as well as an inability to make changes in response to immediate crises, is vulnerable to overshoot of the population.
And you don't think that there are people working in science that will revolutionize the way we produce food, the way we utilize materials, the way we can colonize the globe, the universe. I mean, there are so many things that you're just confining to one plot of land and we haven't even discovered the methods during the Industrial Revolution, people were panicked and terrified that they were going to lose jobs in the hundreds of thousands because everything was going mechanized. That there was science fiction being written at the time where the machines would take over the world. Yeah. It didn't happen. The same thing was happening in the early when the internet was fully going on. That you had things like the Terminator scare, where there's a cybernetic force going to take over the planet. Yet it hasn't yet. But we don't know what the future holds. That's my point. My point is the carrying capacity of what you're talking about may not necessarily occur. It, by all reports, probably will not occur.
Sure.
I don't.
Sure.
So why are we taking the opinions of even maybe a lot? I'll give you say a quarter of a million or 200 million people. I'll give you 200 million people believe what you believe. And I'm just using roughly. Could be more, could be less.
Sure.
Why should we base society on 200 million people? Why can't we just organize it the way it naturally does, spontaneously? And
so, I think I got an answer for your question, if you don't mind me.
Okay, go ahead. No, jump in.
Cool.
This is what.
So, I think a good use for this one in particular would be game theory. So you guys know game theory, right? It's like the idea of we run a couple of scenarios and see which one creates the best result for humanity. Okay. So let's say we got two scenarios: limits to growth are real, limits to growth aren't real. And then we also have two actions, right? We approach it and we do something about it, or we don't approach it, right? So we got approach, don't, and then real, not real, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's say it was real and we approach it.
Mm-hmm.
We've saved the life of between 5 and 85% of the population of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
That alone should be sufficient to be like, oh, fuck, we should do that. Okay, let's say it's real and we don't approach it.
Mm-hmm.
We've now lost 5 to 85% of the population of the planet from just being dicks and being like, we need more oil. Okay. Let's say it's not real and we approach it. What have we done? So let's say the limits to growth aren't real, and we still go ahead and develop these permanent culture. We create societies that are completely self-sustainable. We create cities that are self-sustainable, and we focus on distributing resources such that each person is capable of producing all the resources necessary for their own survival. Permanent culture, basically. We approach that, and the limits to growth aren't real. All we have done is improve the living conditions of every single person on the planet. If they aren't real and we don't approach them, things stay exactly as they are, a net zero.
Okay, let's take this out of the theoretical world and put it into real life. Theoretically, let's just use the same thing the lessons from history. A utopian idea of socialism was introduced into multiple countries. The utopian idea was that everybody's needs will be met. Everybody will have a house, a food, education, healthcare. What happened was poverty, was torture, was death, and the list goes on. Dictatorship. Explain to me how your idea, which is utopian, can justify itself how will it pay for itself? What mechanism is there to pay for itself to actualize that into reality? That's one. Two, again, the capitalist system, our wallets pay to spur things on. So let's take, for instance, when people found out that CFCs were cutting a hole in the ozone layer. What did they do? There was government regulation, did very little, except people had environmental conscience, and they spent where the markets were going with no CFCs. Those people that put CFCs in lost their share in the market, and they went bankrupt. Those that had no CFCs from the beginning, they increased their profits. And they became successful, and it goes on from there. The market, capitalism is self-actualized itself. So it regulates that way. So what I'm saying to you is, even if what you're saying is true, why can't the marketplace deal with that?
So we got two things, I think, and let me make sure I got them right before I answer them all out. So one, we have how are we going to actualize this system?
Yeah. So where's the money coming from? Yep.
Right. And then two, we have the sort of, how can I put it?
Why can't capitalism?
Like if a market's a natural system, how are you going to do it better than a natural system's going to do it? Right? Would you say that would be?
No, I mean the market is natural. It's evolving. So why can't an evolving market make those changes that you're asking? Like, why do we have to get rid of capitalism to install it?
And both of these in context specifically to the limits of growth, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So in order to actualize this or create this system, so this is a very difficult question because the capital required to it's already locked up in the system that exists, right? So we would need to somehow create some sort of way to generate capital to fund this system, et cetera, et cetera. So in my mind, I honestly can't say that I see a way in America, and that's calling back to my earlier claim about the oligarchy and the Stanford study about how like the system is basically an oligarchy, at least here in America, for Americans to regain control of that system without more or less getting crazy or some crazy shit happening.
I can tell you exactly how you could do it within a capitalist system. You devise a program by which it is sufficiently profitable for instance, global warming, for instance, you get some backward people who deny it, but most people accept that it's a thing. Okay. Mm-hmm. There are people who are creating products that reduce the carbon footprint that they produce. So we're actually investing money in science so that, and those companies that are doing that are investing money in science to make their programs much better. So there's a bigger pool pot. So now this money is getting together, and now it's going to actualize itself somehow. It's going to move into the system where it needs to be. The idea for what you do is to come up with a concept that works, that will be of benefit to whoever who wants to pay for it, and then they will find the money. So that's the way capitalism works, right? Like,
kind of.
Well, I mean, that's a basic form of capitalism. I have a product you want. I set a price, but there's someone else that's competing with me, right? So this is how it generates. So that's how I would assume it would go.
So the issue with the limits to growth in particular is that, let's say we're talking about converting from non-renewable power sources, oil, coal, etc., to renewable power sources, right? Mm-hmm. And the research I've read sets the date at around 2030 for the limits to growth to hit, at which point the price of goods will begin rising faster than the rate at which people are able to afford them, leading to more and more people unable to afford the basic standard of living, and then people start dying, so forth and so on.
But that's unreasonable. When electric cars would by that time, or another alternative renewable energy source of a car, a hydrogen car, or what have you, would then become more profitable. It will reduce, the more demand it will be, and the more supply would happen, the price would come down. So therefore, we would have to, those things would already, by the time oil got to that point, we would already have these in going.
That's the idea, yes. That's the idea, yes. Well, that's the idea, yes. But the reality is, if we look at the current rate of resource usage and the current rate of conversion to renewable resources, essentially when they look at like, oh, okay, if this is a specific deadline, right, let's say 2030, then we need it to be converting at a rate of 2.5% per year. So 2.5%, 2 years is 5%. So about 40 years to be 100% converted to renewable resource. So 2.5% from non-renewable to renewable resources per year, starting in about 1990 or 1980. The actual rate of conversion has been about 1% since 2002.
All right.
So
because And all I'm saying is that the market has not demanded it. If the market demands it, it will come down.
If the market demands it, yes, but we have to remember that these resources have to come from somewhere.
Right, and the biggest users of fossil fuels in the global sphere are communist countries such as China that are using a mercantile form of capitalism.
Yeah.
We have North Korea. This is not just an American issue. This has to be a global issue. If we're going to stick and say, oh, we're going to take over the United States and this is going to change the growth index or the carrying capacity of the planet, you're still laughing up a tree, right? Because you're not doing a dent.
What do you mean? I mean, in comparison to China's replanted all their forests and things like that. The one-party system that runs communist China has a significant advantage when we're talking about the ability of the system to make changes to immediate crises.
When does it have that system? When does the one-party system ever have an advantage over our democracy? It has never. If that was the case,
all their forests, just I want to say within the last 5 years, all the forests they cut down in the 70s, they just replanted it because they can.
And how long would they last? I'm just saying it has the most toxic air.
Talking about the
forest? The most toxic air. Has by far on the globe has the worst record for air quality on the planet. So how long is the air going to be fit for these plants, and how long before we have they have acid rainfall? I mean, the environmental disaster that is China is not. It's not because it's unwilling to do anything. Oh, sorry. It's not that it's not the fact that it can't do anything about it. It's the fact that it's unwilling to do anything about it. I mean,
so you mean like in regards to like, let's talk about the Yangtze River, which is famous for the amount of like chemical pollution and stuff like that. It's the reason it's like that is because you're arguing the Chinese government allows it to be like that.
Of course, it has no other. Under a single party, a dictatorship, the party has full control over the country. If it wanted to clean up its resources, it would. If it wanted to clean up the air, it would. It just does not. It chooses not to do so because why?
Well, the air, at least with the air, that planting all these trees was in response to that particular issue, and they did manage to do it in a time frame much shorter than America, at least, has managed to fix the particular Flint water crisis.
Yeah, I mean, you're still talking about billowing more carbon dioxide into the air, and you're also looking into 100 things that it could do to improve its atmosphere, and it's now not doing it. And how are you going to? One of the things is how you're going to replenish the oceans, the stocks, the amount of fish that is being consumed by China alone.
Yeah, China, it's a serious issue.
I live in Newfoundland. We ship hundreds of millions of tons of fish to China, Japan, where we've depleted areas in our province just to make sure that China has enough for in the market. So if you're going to say a single party system has the mechanism, the power to make sweeping changes like plant trees or deforested trees, then why doesn't it do the things necessary to spur on such a great civilization that you ask for?
See, I guess that's really speaking to the state of China itself, more so than more or less you're essentially asking me why don't I run China and make China do like my things? But
no,
China has its
I'm saying particular. What you're asking for is that you're the dictator, okay? You're going to dictate. You're dictating to me that this is the utopian society that you want to live in, right? So as the dictator, right? So how are you going to convince me to follow your system?
So let's say I don't know, I'm in America and I became leader of some political party and that was my, what's the word, platform? So my platform was material rights. right to food, housing, healthcare, education, whatever you want to call it, all those good things. So the way I'm going to make you as another citizen participate in the system that I created is by 1, winning the election, 2, putting the laws into place, 3, making there be conditions for not obeying those laws. Same way any country goes ahead and organizes themselves.
Okay.
I'm not a very high authoritarian person. Like, these are ideas that I believe are necessary for the advancement of society, when we talk about the limits to growth.
And that's my issue. And I'm not knocking you personally. And I want you to understand. What I'm saying to you is those are your ideas. And not that they're not noble or noteworthy, but everything you've talked about tonight has been from one point of view. Like, this is what your idea of society should be. But you never talk about as society as it is, as people are. People are not cookie cutter. They're individuals. They change. They adapt. They're very.
I would like to think that I did discuss that in particular, at least with regards to meritocracy and self-actualization. I talked broadly about a large issue, the limits of growth, right? Mm-hmm. I talked about how providing these basic rights to the individual, self-actualization and meritocracy, would improve the individual's ability to participate, take opportunities, all these kind of good things, right? As
in the
well, in a capitalist system, if you want to call it capitalist, I think personally, if we're dismantling society and instituting these kind of rights, it's probably not worthwhile to call it capitalist anymore.
But capitalism has evolved and changed. Like I said in my speech earlier, it's flexible. Like, we've had workers have joined unions, had unions, the work unions movement. We've had women's liberation movement. We've had movements like the civil rights movement. Yeah. They were all happened within the confines of capitalism, but capitalism still moves on. It doesn't. You don't destroy the system to make these adjustments. These adjustments can fit within the realm of capitalism, and it still works.
Well, you know me. I didn't say destroy. I said dismantle.
Yeah,
right?
But I mean, that's the same thing. Dismantling, destroying it, kicking it to the curb.
Absolutely not. I was very specific in my claim that dismantling it into its components doesn't necessarily mean we need to get rid of the markets. We can keep markets. People like markets. Doesn't mean we need to get rid of, like, housing or, like, money. I didn't say any of that. I said specifically 3 components: limits to growth, the self-actualization and meritocracy, and the idea of efficiency versus utilization. I think we have different definitions of utilization, and I think we could probably discuss that a bit more.
Yeah, mine came from Webster's dictionary, so.
Oh, okay.
So I mean, I'm just going by what it actually says under its definition.
Yeah, no, mine was like an economic definition I read somewhere. That's just one of those things,
Yeah, but I mean, one of the things that we have, I mean, like, you've talked about that everybody deserves the right to a home. In my home country, I mean, we have homeless people here, but that's by choice. We have people, we have homes, we have hostels, we have all kinds of things. You are provided welfare in our country, we also provide free healthcare to every citizen. Doesn't matter if they're rich or poor. These are things that have been encompassed into our capitalist system, and the capitalist system is what pays for it. And
so I think it's worthwhile to make the distinction that a welfare state is not equivalent to a right to material goods.
But I mean,
close. It can be considered close in certain circumstances, assuming that prices of things are certain ways.
Okay, so everybody has a right to a home. Okay, Everybody has a right to a home. And I'm just playing devil's advocate because I don't see the issue here. But my problem is, again, you're having to pay for these rights. You have to pay for everything that comes. The only system we've ever seen in the history of mankind, that actually provides that growth that you're discussing and the freedom to do that, that means the ability to gain rights, is capitalism.
Okay. Yeah. And I mean, let's say we look at, I mean, that's a tough one for me because, I mean, like I was saying earlier, where we didn't necessarily get a chance to talk about this. So you were talking about, let's say, Singapore, Hong Kong, Taiwan as examples of the successes of capitalism in Asia, South Africa and Morocco in Africa. But there's a lot more countries in those locations, and the default is capitalism. You know, a lot of these countries may be social democracies, but they still don't have all these rights, all these nice things that we're
But that's one of the things that is brilliant about capitalism is not that they don't have the rights. That's not what I meant. Is the fact that each individual culture that adopts it, okay, they adapt it to their local conditions. Yeah. So take, for instance, Japanese capitalism. Japanese capitalism used capitalism, the structure of capitalism, and they combined it with traditional Japanese beliefs. So, this is precisely different than the capitalist system in the United States. And your capitalist system in the United States is totally different than the capitalist system where I live. And the thing is, we're not dictate, like a capitalist doesn't dictate to a country, you have to follow X, Y, and Z. This is not a prescription. This is what you do to get money to make your country prosperous. Capitalism can't stamp out corruption, but neither can any socialist country that has ever existed. It has never, ever.
So I think that calls back to my initial point, which is, so I know you're an anthropologist of sorts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, have you ever read David Graeber?
Yes, I have.
So you know about Debt the First 5,000 Years when he discusses like alternative structures of various economics.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So one of his things he talks about is like these different ideas of economies, how different societies existed before this kind of global hegemony that we now exist under. One of the things that for me was most enlightening about that particular book was the capacity of humanity, which is something that I talked about in my speech.
Right. But I mean, and I appreciate that because when you say that you want to have people self-actualize, that's a wonderful notion, but that doesn't mean anything on an economic front. It means absolutely squat.
Absolutely, I agree with that.
And what we're talking about is the economic systems. We're not talking, and when you're talking economics, self-actualization means zero. It could be that your self-actualization means that you're a go-getter. You have a product and you have a way to sell it. You can
labor, spiritual and emotional labor beyond what provides just your needs. It's a very specific thing. Yeah, so if you're laboring to sell something because you need to make more money for your house, for your mortgage, that's not self-actualization.
Right, but that means that you also have to believe in a concept like there's something beyond the material. I'm a materialist. I have no concept of what you're talking about. None. Zero. I have none.
So essentially you're arguing that if your material needs are met 100%, you're 100% content, period. If you're not hungry, you're not thirsty, you don't have to pee, you're done.
There's more to that. But I mean, you never get even in a socialist system, a purely socialist system, never ever had your everything met, let alone your spiritual needs. You never even had your belly filled. So the idea that just because you have your basic needs met that you have everything else done. No, there are capitalists. The only reason why they work is because that's what they enjoy. Has nothing to do with anything they're going to.
Absolutely.
So but that's for them. For my self-actualization, I could be wanting to sit on my couch and eat Doritos all day. Does that mean that so that means that I get paid to do that?
I don't know if you get paid.
What
we would certainly provide you the opportunity
to do that.
Yeah.
So, but why? What does that contribute to society? You're talking about the individual being a tyranny, but then you're saying that the individual can do whatever the hell they want, and then we're supposed to supply them with stuff.
Exactly. So we in American capitalism, right? We take this tyranny of the individual and we allow it to run rampant. What I am proposing is a reduction of that particular tyranny, right? So whereas today a particularly sociopathic, like silver spoon in his tongue, could be a billionaire or millionaire, I'm proposing that we minimize the ability of the individual to obtain resources in excess of his own personal needs.
Okay. Let me give you a story, and let me see if get your response to this. Every kid in school should know this. It's about the little red hen. Little red hen finds these wheat seeds and plants them. Well, before she goes to plant them, she asks the cow, the bull, and the duck, will they help her?
Nobody but the people in Newfoundland know the story of the little red hens. Jesus
no, I've heard
Christ,
this before,
Dad.
but it's been a long time. Keep going. I want to hear.
Anyway, so she asks those three animals if they, they'll help her. They say no. She plants the seeds anyway. They ask her, so she continues to ask them along the way, like, will you help me water? Will you help me weed? Will you help me harvest? Will you help me make flour? And every time they say no.
Yep.
And then she says, well, will you help me make bread? And they say no. But when she makes the bread, they say,
can we get some bread?
No, she asks them, do you want to help me eat it? They say yes. And she says, absolutely not. I did all the work. You laid up. Why do those animals, or in this case humans, have the right to declaim what she has, her labor, the fruits of her labor? Why does someone that does jack but sit on his couch and eat cheesies deserve me to pay for it for him?
So this is essentially where I think the most critical kind of, at least in my opinion, the idea of a next generation society comes into existence, right? So one of the things Marx talks about, I know you're talking about him earlier, or I guess not even necessarily Marx, maybe like post-Marxist, because I don't think Marx ever actually said this. It's something I've heard out and about, is like, okay, so we come up with some new innovation. We kind of way to produce twice as much goods per unit of time. Doesn't matter what the good is. Doesn't matter what it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what happens in capitalism? You fire half the workers and the other half work 40 hours per week, right?
Maybe.
So you've saved half of your labor costs. Now,
right. But you also have to have the people to buy those products. You just can't make them.
Yeah, to an extent.
Sorry, can I jump in for 1 second?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so as the only business owner on this panel, it depends on the business, right? Like some people want to cut costs on labor, but if your business is skill orientated, then you're gonna want to pay more for your labor so that your employees are higher skilled than to have, like, labor cost is not where you cut down in, say, finished carpentry or architecture.
Yeah.
You get what I'm saying? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to mute myself now.
Okay. But what I'm saying to you, okay, one of the things that I think will benefit capitalism into the future, okay, is that every person in my country gets a minimum basic income. So everybody gets $20,000.
Do they have that right now or no?
No. We're actually doing experimentations with it.
Hang on. That's not entirely true. Thunder Bay, Smith Falls, and 3 other cities within my province have the universal basic income. They're doing a trial to see whether or not it's going to go province-wide. We have also implemented free tuition to college as of this year, and as of October 2018, minimum wage will be $14 an hour, and then as of October 2019, it'll be $15 an hour.
Okay, so universal income. So basically $20,000 across the board. Okay. Now everybody's needs met, And that still works within a capitalist system, because every time when you go to work, it's all income that you're working. You're not stressing about where your bills are coming from.
Yep.
That removes the welfare system. So we don't need the welfare system anymore. We get a basic income. So everybody, whether rich or poor, gets that basic $20,000. And that's still not dismantling capitalism. That's just giving it an extra rev. You're giving it an extra boost that people, when they get out to work, they're not stressing about paying bills.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, sorry, I'm just saying, so I don't understand why people are asking to dismantle the only system that works.
So, I mean, ideally, you know, like so universal basic income too, I studied it a lot, and Nixon did a study in the United States and Canada in the 70s, I think. So he gave universal basic income to three small towns, and the results of this particular study showed that unlike what most of your more serious major pro-capitalist types that are like, no, work, no universal basic income, no welfare state kind of capitalists will argue, is that universal basic income makes people lazy. What we see in reality from this study in particular in 1970s, and you guys, everybody here can look up this study.
So here, I don't mean to interrupt you. So I'll speak to the Canadian side of it. So it was Dauphin, Manitoba. And what they found was that the citizens in Dauphin, Manitoba became healthier. They worked more, and they actually followed through and got higher grades in their education. Go ahead. I'll mute myself again. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries, dude. So the name of the study is in the Chicago Journal of Labor Economics, and I believe the title is Responses to a Guaranteed Annual Income. Or something like that. You can Google that. So basically Google Chicago Journal of Labor Economics, Chicago Journal of Labor Economics, Responses to a Guaranteed Minimum Income. And it'll give you a study that examines this result in 1970s. And what they saw was that there was an average of a 7.5% reduction in hours worked, which sounds like a lot, but it was actually only 40 hours to 37.5, with the most of the reduction being in single mothers and teenagers, which is perfectly cool. You know, that's fine. So, you know, like for me, like when it comes to capitalism, my primary concern, as I said initially, was the limits to growth. Those three things. Mm-hmm. The exponential growth, the decay of the limit, so you have like acidification, desertification of the land, and the inability of the system to make changes in response to oncoming crises. If American capitalism could implement a universal basic income, I would be fine. I'd be okay with that. That'd be fine, you know? But I don't believe, given the study I talked about earlier with the Stanford oligarchy and all these other things, but unlike Canada, that these mechanisms are possible.
Right. Okay, so let's take the American example, for instance. One of the biggest problems that you have between the two-party system is that you have Democrats and Republicans. Republicans want to reduce taxes and reduce, but they like to spend. They just don't like to say they do, but they do. Mm-hmm. The Democrats want to raise taxes, but they want to spend. So whatever they take in in taxes goes out. So your country's been running deficits for 50 years.
And it's also two pro-capitalist parties. There's no real representation for somebody like me.
But they are pro-capitalist, but you have a system that's in place within your government that the regulations are not used effectively. Remember, regulations are static. Markets are dynamic. Okay? So regulation doesn't keep up with what the market is doing. Those that are old will get circumvented. And what you're seeing now is lobby groups coming in and getting specific populations to go in. I won't get into the American system very much, but it's not the only form of capitalism out there. It is but you make it seem as that capitalism is a dirty word, and that the countries around the world that are using capitalism, like Sweden, Norway, they're all capitalist countries that have provide more for its citizens. In fact, Sweden is the first country in the world when it comes to living conditions. So,
I mean, I agree with that absolutely, but at the same time, I can't help but ask: would these systems be as good and as powerful as they are without the imperialism of the United States since World War II?
But that's but that if you then how where does that affect Sweden? Where does that affect Canada? Where does that affect Britain? Where does that affect Japan? I mean, remember, Japan was
how
nearly
did containment of the USSR affect the? How did the containment of the USSR at the end of World War II prevent Stalin from invading all of Europe?
Even if he did, if he did, then Europe would have been in worse shape than ever. They basically neglected every individual in their country to the point of death and poverty.
I have another question.
Okay. Is everybody discussing now? Or are we going to have like a multiple discussion?
No, I'm just asking
let's do it. All
questions, man.
Yeah, let's
just asking one question. Okay, so if the say Sweden and all those other countries, if the citizens are lifted in those countries and it's based on the imperialism or say the lack of equality or egalitarianism in the United States, wouldn't the sheer number of people being helped be a good thing? Wouldn't the sacrifice of a few be good for the many?
Kyle, I want to give you the option, man. Like, I can just cut that bit out and you don't have to answer because this is between, like, dude, I'm the moderator. Fuck off with your waving hands, Dave.
Yeah, I'm bored. I'm bored.
And I get that you're bored. We have a fucking show to do here. God damn it. And, like, I have a job to moderate. So, like, it's up to you, man. I want to give you the option. I don't want to railroad you in any way.
I don't know. Doesn't matter.
Well, how about if I answer his question so we can have the discussion and then we can cut it anyways?
We'll cut it
no, I mean we're leave it all if you're gonna answer the question. I just don't want him to necessarily like steer. You know what I mean? Like I don't want you to feel railroaded. That's my point, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
I want you to feel fair. Okay.
No, it's very good. This is very great. I appreciate you guys having me on again. This has been great.
All right. Really that's one legal.
For me.
So repeat your question so I can hear it again. Because I've been drinking this whole time.
What you said was. You said that Sweden's success and all the other like social democracies in Europe and Canada and all the other successful countries are based on the American system, right? Like if you didn't have the
or basically without American military intervention, there would have been significant changes.
Yes. But isn't the sheer number of all the citizens in those countries being helped kind of worth it in the end? In the view of a communist, it's not the individual in your mind, right? It's the group. So wouldn't that be a good thing?
This I think speaks to kind of the issue with globalization and globalism. You know, like people want to talk about globalism and all these kind of things. And feel free to yell at me if this is wrong because this is just like opinion and just scooting. Yeah. But basically, when we look at like the benefits of America in the first world, and I only mentioned this briefly, we know that there's this thing called separation of production from consumption. So we know that the rare earth metals in our phones today likely come from slave mines in the Congos, where they have children slaves and all these other things. We know this happens. Nobody necessarily understands the specific mechanism by which that metal ends up in the electronics in your phone, but it happens. So we have to ask ourselves, okay, so we built up these countries to a great standard of living. Everybody has smartphones, everybody's chilling, everybody's happy, but what is the value or what is the cost to the third world where we have these communities, slave labor, children slaves, just the worst of the worst abuses to produce those materials?
Okay, but then what? Okay, can I ask you a simple question about Soviet Russia?
Yeah.
When it would, like in the United States, and in Canada and Britain, we send aid, and we send delegations to people to help them to increase their level, their living standards, as well as we try to give them money that we donating what we could use for our citizens, but we're not. We're donating to them. We didn't have to do that. We could have just went in and raped all their material and just left. Whereas the Soviet Union, that's exactly what they did. They went into areas and just cleaned house and left it and walked away. I mean, we did in the earlier days of colonialism. That was when Britain was still a colony and the United States wasn't even a country. But what I'm talking about modern day, the 20th century, you're not seeing that. You're seeing what people are doing is using their wallets to say, I don't want to shop at a company that does sweatshop labor.
Well, I see what you're saying, where we have issues with Stalin and imperialism as well. We can argue directly that Stalin's imperialism went directly to the fall of the collapse of the USSR. But at the same time, I have to ask, to what extent is, the invasion of Iraq directly responsible for maintaining the low cost of oil? These particular contradictions.
It's not. It hasn't stabilized the price of oil even in my country where we get our oil from Saudi Arabia. The hell? It doesn't do anything for. It doesn't. I mean, we produce more oil than Saudi Arabia. Well, probably not more in Saudi Arabia, but we produce a lot of oil here in our country. But we never use it for our citizens.
Why is it that we're all allies with Saudi Arabia? What the hell is that?
No one knows.
We're coming to the end right here. Would either one of you gentlemen like to make a final statement? I guess Kyle, I'll let you decide who makes it first.
I guess I can go first because this has been pretty productive. So I think I've just got a broad claim. I just kind of want to repeat my general points. I do think that there is a particular concern with the limits to growth. I don't think that the system as it exists now will make the changes at a rate adequate to prevent these crises of the limits of growth. So like I was just saying with the idea of child slave mines in the Congo and all these other ones, when we talk about the limits to growth, we're not talking about Americans starving to death. We're talking about these same third world countries that supply us these basic resources that aren't fully developed, starving to death and suffering the consequences of providing us the raw materials for our first world lifestyle. So I think the limits to growth really speaks kind of to the critical sort of crises that is the sort of worst case scenario for a capitalist society, one in which we can't rely on the market to adjust in time to the problems that are existing. By the time the market begins adjusting, it's already too late. So I think that's a good foundation.
And instituting these would be an astronomical cost. Where we're going to get the money to do it, I have no idea. There's to allow everybody to have their needs met globally. 7 billion plus people. That's an astronomical amount of money. I don't know if we could even do it physically. I think it's a crazy thing. But again, what we're doing as we can't solve the world's crisis on carrying capacity, or I forget the exact word you actually used, but the
overshoot.
Pardon, say that again. Sorry.
Overshoot. Our limited carrying capacity. Carrying capacity, yeah. I think will be fine. Carrying capacity is fine.
The carrying capacity is impossible to even do it by one country even if every single country individually did something, then we could do something to change it. But one country doing it by itself could never do it. And that has nothing to do with capitalism. That has to do with world government. And that is not the topic of tonight. But so I'm going to say that that's an issue that would be more dealt with in a political discussion than an economic discussion.
All right, so Dave, you bored cocksucker. You want to close this out?
Yeah, I'm not bored. I just you hear things that you kind of you know what I mean. Like
you're used to talking.
I'm used to talking. There's a lot of points a lot of points made. Can we have a non-debate discussion, or is that like off limits?
We can do that.
I actually have questions.
We can do.
for
Well, I want to throw something out real quick. I've been really quiet, and I can cut this out. It doesn't matter to me. The use of slave labor in third world countries to cheapen our prices is actually an abortion of the way capitalism is supposed to be practiced today.
Yes.
So. It is actually circumventing the law of supply and demand in order to provide a cheaper service within America, and we should stop that as a capitalist country.
The West is
I get it. I just America's
I
world.
wish.
I'm sorry.
Ideally, yeah. If we stop that, that'd be great.
Listen,
I love it.
Right, and we should. I'm saying like that's not a problem of capitalism. That's a problem.
I'm going to throw this out there. If they made a smartphone that was free of children mining for the shit that goes inside, and also for the poor Chinese fuckers that are hunched over making it, and it costs an extra $100, I would spend it.
Well, the price very well may double, if that's the case.
But I would spend it.
But yes, but then you get a phone and you take care of it, and we just slow down development. Like that's what you do. So the answer is regulation. I'm sorry, Ed.
Okay.
Take care. Thank you for chatting with me. I really appreciate it. Really
no, Kyle. I mean, stick around for a few minutes. We'll have a talk afterwards and off the record. And
oh yeah. So that was a debate between Edward Smith and Kyle the Communist. That's what he is forever going to be known as on this show from now on. I was left with a lot more questions than I think I had answers. During this discussion, you can write to us at all of our social media outlets to tell us whether or not you were fulfilled or if you had more questions for Kyle than answers. All right, that's it.
You've been listening to the Everyone's Wrong podcast. You can find us on our homepage at Spreaker.com/Everyone's Wrong. You can also find us on iTunes and YouTube by searching for Everyone's Wrong Podcast, or you can listen to us on your podcast app of choice by importing our RSS feed. You can follow us on Facebook.com/Everyone's Wrong, or join our closed Facebook group by searching Facebook for Everyone's Wrong After Hours. You can tweet us at wrong_pod or email us at everyone'swrongpodcast@gmail.com.